The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution with which any panel member is associated. Reproduction or dissemination, other than for the purpose of education or information, without the expressed written permission of the Phoenix Research Institute or Nova Society Media is strictly prohibited. Welcome back to the Nova Society, the space where dialogue deepens understanding and civic responsibility comes to life. I'm Dr. Mark Bound, joined by my partner in crime, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and together we'll unpack the stories that matter most, exploring the headlines and history. The big ideas shaping today's conversations. Let's dive in and hear what our guests and listeners have for us today. Today, the Nova Society welcomes Chris Angle. Chris is a graduate of the University of Michigan. He also did graduate studies in Japan as a missionary and studied Japanese language and culture. While Chris was matriculating in the University of Michigan, Chris discovered a desire to write creatively. In his senior year, he discovered that he could meld the disciplines of mankind's biological behavior with philosophy, and as such, he produced a research paper that examined the relationship between the concepts of beauty, behavioral evolution, and mankind's will to survive. Upon graduation, while studying abroad, Chris discovered that he could readily define philosophical concepts. In Japan, he produced the initial draft of his first book, The Nature of Aesthetics. Upon returning to the U.S., he finished the manuscript and subsequently produced 4 more works, which he self-published and are available in paperback, Kindle, and audio formats wherever books are sold. Chris's books include The Nature of Aesthetics, The Nature of Ethics, The Nature of Truth, The Philosophical Equations of Economics, and most recently, The Nature of Political Left and Right. Today we'll be focusing on the final book, The Nature of Political Left and Right, and the differences between conservatives and the progressive liberals. We will hear Chris's explanation for the origins and essence of politics, while this divide between the two political philosophies exists and why the divide between them is growing. So today we welcome Chris Angle. We're going to be talking today about his latest book, The Nature of Political Left and Right, and he really talks about the differences between conservatives and the progressive liberals and why that divide is going. So welcome, Chris. What have you found out about the divide of politics in the United States and actually around the world?
Sure. So I guess we should probably start with the nature of the political party and where it comes from, just to begin this the conversation, because
Sure.
That's important to figure out some of the things I'm going to say later. And so when we kind of ran around in tribes and small groups, there would be a leader, an elder, somebody that was maybe a little bit stronger, a little bit more intelligent, a little bit more energetic, and so an elder or somebody that take care of the group emerge. And when somebody gets in the position of strength, he'll tend to want, as other mammals do, in the animal kingdom, they'll tend to want a little bit more of from society than the others. And as society grows and becomes no longer a tribe where everybody knows everybody else and grows larger, then that elder or leader morphs into a king. And with the king, because he likes things more for himself, and this fulfills the economic dictum number 1 in the world, that all life does that which is good for it, and continually does that which is good for it, and continually wants to have more of what is good for it. And so once a king evolves within society, then it has that king and queen will want more for themselves, and so they do. And so what happens is that you get your first political divide, and you get the haves and the have-nots. And throughout history, that's pretty much where it was. The haves and the have-nots, and the haves always looked down upon the have-nots, and so they became prominent. Leaders became prominent because what I'm going to call principle number 2 which is that the famous St. Augustine's principle that of libido dominandi, that men tend to dominate, just as the animal, many in the animal kingdom, the males will fight it out to be able to pass on their genes to the next generation, and of course they want more for themselves than the others in the group, and men are no different, and so they tend to dominate, and so the king and queen will dominate and take more out of society than others, and so that's the first political party, the haves, and then they have the have-nots, and the have-nots are always looked down upon, and the haves look down upon the have-nots, and there's a reason why they look down upon them, because they look down upon them because they know that they're no good, that their nature is no good, and throughout history, the kings and queens always look down upon the have-nots. If you were a have-not, you could not marry up into the aristocratic class, and so the origin of the aristocrats is that they that the king and queen needed people to facilitate their edicts, and so the aristocratic class is born, and now you have several classes, and then what happens is that you'll have what I'm going to call dictum 4 or dictum 3. Let's see where, and dictum 3 is that they look down upon you, and so your nature is not good. They consider your nature not good, and the haves, somebody who wants to cooperate and make peace in his life and work, and he'll look upon others and want to cooperate with them, and he'll look, and in order to cooperate with them, they'll look at your nature, and that nature they'll see something good, and so they'll want to cooperate with that because you have a nature that is good. You'll have something that you can offer, and this is very important because that enables us to cooperate, and when we cooperate, we produce goods and services, and we produce goods and services to bring us up away from misery, which is the essence of good. And so this is also why later on the political parties gradually move to the left, little by little throughout the world, because the left will look at the right and say your nature is not good, and so they'll not want to cooperate. They'll not want to give up their situation. And so when somebody comes along and drags the pendulum back to the right, and the right means I'm talking about freedom here, there's a total disconnect, and the screaming and shouting will come about. So then something terrible happens to the haves. 1688, the English Revolution happens, and in 1688 a Bill of Rights is described, and then something even worse than that happens to the haves. The American Revolution happened, and when that happened, democracy is brought into the arena of ideas, and suddenly the haves have to convince the have-nots to vote for them. And this is the cause of huge consternation for the haves, which morphed into the have-nots. Now, why do I say into the liberals? I say it into the liberals because the liberals are for more control. And if you look at the ultimate controllers of societies throughout the world, they are leftists. The totalitarian leaders are all leftists because they want to control all of society and bring more of that which is good for them to take it away from the have-nots of society. And so all the totalitarian regimes like North Korea, like Pol Pot, like Mao, like Castro, they all wanted everything in society, and all were to work for them. And this comes from the last 5,000 years of all of the kings. The kings looked at themselves as being the God's gift to the world, and only their priorities mattered. And so they wanted to take away the freedom of the have-nots and control the have-nots, so that they can bring all their goodness to them. to fulfill dictum one. What happened was that after the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and democracy this idea of democracy came into being. So in the 1820s, something happened, and that was that the aristocrats sat around in Europe, and they were thinking, well, we don't want these guys to rise up again and cut our heads off. This is terrible, and we've also got to convince them to vote for us. And so what they did is they came up with the theory of noblesse oblige, and noblesse oblige in the 1820s stated that, okay, we the aristocrats, we the haves, will now provide for you the have-nots, and will provide a certain level of living so that you can live your life and not starve together, and we won't take everything that you have, and we'll allow you to live. So, and for that, you don't cut our heads off. And then that was the start of socialism. And then soon after that, in 1848, the famous Communist Manifesto and other advocates of socialism arose from noblesse oblige, from the problem that the haves now have to convince the have-nots to vote for them. And so how do they do that? Well, they do that by showing how bad you, the have-nots, the people that are downtrodden, how bad you have behaved. And so you need somebody to show you down the path of goodness. And so that's how they do it. And then so when they as they gain control over society, reminiscent of the kings and queens of yore. I don't know if you ever read First Circle by Solzhenitsyn, but he does a great depiction of Stalin and his paranoia and his thoughts that how great he should be and how he needs to control society and just like the kings in their kings and queens of yore that thought that produced the divine right of kings, that they were God's voice, and this happens because of dictum 5 that their minds become corrupted, and this is and that's dictum 5 is the famous Lord Acton statement, whereby power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That process is that well, first we need to define freedom, because the people who are going to control are going to take away freedom, and freedom is the creation of a priority in one's mind, and then the effectuation of that priority, and priorities are pieces of knowledge, and so when you effectuate your priorities, you bring an efficiency into the economy, and so that's relevant here in that Stalin or any other totalitarian would take his priorities and know that only his priorities may be effectuated in society, and that he's in total control. And when he's in total control, he does not need cooperation from others. And when you don't need cooperation, you have no ethics, because ethics, the nature of ethics, is the appropriate dispensation of respect. And respect is the evolutionary means by which that evolved within us. It was the evolutionary means by which we may cooperate with each other. And so in respectful behavior allows us to cooperate, and we cooperate to produce goods and services, which is the essence of all that is good, because we want goodness to come to ourselves. And so when somebody realizes that they don't have to cooperate with others, their mind becomes corrupted. And that corruption is, as Lord Acton's statement says, and one's corrupted because he realized he doesn't have to cooperate, and only his priorities matter in society, And then something terrible happens. When you have only your priorities matter in society, you then lose all touch of all and that is ethical. Because as we just said, ethics is the appropriate dispensation of respect, which allows us to cooperate. And so when you don't have cooperation, you don't need cooperation, you don't want to cooperate, you lose all sense of ethics. And what happens when you lose all sense of happens? All that is left is the end justifies the means. And this is the mantra of the kings and queens, of the haves over the have-nots, over of those who control of society, of all the left totalitarians' view of society is without ethics. And thus what they do is terrible. Mao, how many did he kill? How many did Pol Pot? He killed, what, 50% of his population just for an ideal that, for one of his priorities of how people should live? And how many did North Korea kill? And you don't know because how much, but totalitarians, because totalitarians try to work in secret because they don't have to cooperate with anybody.
Right.
And,
let's try to unpack some of this. All right.
Okay.
So let's because you've given us a lot here. You've given us a lot to unpack onto this. Number one, I think that it is fully in agreement here that throughout the history of humanity, humans have always gravitated to larger social structures, from the family to the village to a country to a kingdom to a nation state. And at this point in time in our evolution, we are stuck in the nation state stage of social development. That's why when people talk about globalization, and we're beginning to see a move toward globalization, because humans tend to, for different reasons, economic, security, they move toward larger social constructs. And the only larger social construct of that would be a totally global society. So, that really isn't, I don't think is an issue. I think that's just something that we do. There's also, we have to understand that there are, in humankind, there are natural leaders and there are natural followers. And we do get the followers, and the majority are the followers. And when we run into that issue where the followers are having a problem with the leaders, that's when we start to see conflict as it relates to society. So that's
called a revolution.
Well, yeah, it can be. Absolutely. I guess my question is, now you talk about, say, Stalin, and we talk about, say, Kim Jong-un and some of these other actors within. I don't think, and I don't know, Scott, you stick with me with this or not, I don't think I would call them liberal. I also don't think I would call them conservative from the standard definition that we may have of those two ideologies. There is a huge difference between, and I think we all understand this, there's a huge difference between conservatives. Conservatives want to keep things the status quo the way it is. That's a conservative idea. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Liberals have a tendency to want to change things for what they see as issues within society. And if we ever see one thing throughout the history of politics and society's evolution, progressives, and I've said this to Scott, we've said this so many times on this podcast, progressives lose almost all the battles. But in the end, they always win the war because society always progresses. And I think that's, so when we're talking about kings and queens, again, we're talking about a different time than today's society. And we have morphed quite a bit since the times of Louis XVI or Charles II or any of the rest of them. We're now in a different position. And so when we start defining these political ideologies and why we're starting to see that divide become, we can actually look right here in the United States. Those that identify as conservative if you look at the demographic of those that are identified as conservative, you're going to find that many of them are the have-nots. And I think that's an important thing. But the issue is that the leadership gets that group to vote against their own interests by telling them that this interest is in their interest when in reality it's not. Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, while Chris was talking, I was thinking about Nietzsche's will to power.
Yes.
I was thinking about realism, political realism. Yep. That just as people do what is best for them and defends that harshly against other people who may be encroaching on what is best for them, we've seen that leaders do the same thing. I mean, I think we're seeing it now, which kind of leads me to this, Chris. all of what you're saying is kind of interesting, but can you bring it to where we are right now?
Sure. Because the divide here the original divide was between the have and the have-nots, and the haves wanted control, and the have-nots wanted freedom and to be able to spend in life in peace and be able to earn what they have made, but all that has been taken away from them throughout history because the haves don't allow the have-nots to come up and do that which is best for them. So what happens is they tax or take all that they have produced, and eventually what happened is that you got a French Revolution, you got an American Revolution where the people wanted that which is what they produce, and when they wanted the freedom to be able to receive that which is what they produce. And so a revolution occurs, and from that revolution, they revert back. They take their freedom to themselves and keep it to themselves, and not allow the haves to have everything that they've produced. And so the conservatives, and when I say conservatives, they're it depends on the time of what the situation is to know that a conservative really wants to keep what he has, and he wants to enjoy freedom, and that's what caused revolutions, was the lack of freedom. And so today I would define a conservative as the person who wants freedom, but and the person who wants control is the people that evolved from the haves, which are today's liberals. Because you look at the liberals, they constantly look to gain more control. You hear the word plantation. The people they want to keep their people on the plantation, just like Tammany Hall, just like when the foreigners came over from Western Europe and 100 years ago. The first thing to do is that Tammany Hall met them, and that was the liberal left, the Democratic Party, and they expected their vote by the help that they gave them, and so they had a political machine in place, and that machine is still today. And so you made a remark that some people who are poor and some people who have gained riches don't necessarily are conservative, and that's true, because the haves, the leftists, will try to incorporate those who have control over others, like a president of a company. They'll try to bring that person into their sphere of influence, and so the Democratic Party will always try to incorporate the presidents and those people who control salaries in to join them, and they'll give motivation to do that, and so when and what happens is that when a person who is poor jumps out of the class, and he's able to do that by freedom that has been installed, and therefore the United States is the best country in the world because it protects the freedoms as noted in Article 1, Section 10, and in the 10 Amendments. That is the reason, because that America is the greatest country, and everybody wants to come here, and we are economically better than all others because it allows the have-not to come out of having nothing. He exploits freedom, he exploits freedom by creating his own priorities in his mind, and then effectuating those priorities. And he creates the priority because he sees an efficiency he wants to bring in to his life. He brings in the efficiency by effectuating that, brings in efficiency into the economy, and with that comes greater knowledge. And so he brings into efficiencies and makes society better and better. And then he sells his efficiencies, makes a transaction, it sells it, it goes all throughout society, and he prospers. And because of the 10 Amendments that guarantee our freedom, that the leftists cannot take away, the have-nots cannot take away, because they can't take it away. Everybody wants to come here, and he's able to jump out and go into the bourgeois class, and so he is so because the liberals must either have a choice, either they work against him or they try and incorporate him, who has joined the bourgeois class, into him, or they try to shame him in that you've left your buddies down there in the plantation, and aren't you bad for having done so? But if he has enough power, then they try to incorporate him into their society of the haves, and so the haves, really, the Democrats, the liberals, have evolved from the haves of society.
All right. Well, Chris, I will say this. I mean, if you look at both parties in the United States today, Republican or Democrat, there are not a whole heck of a lot of have-nots sitting in the Congress right now or in the United States Senate. They're pretty much all haves. I mean, you don't find a lot of, blacksmiths or something else in there. You're finding, right. They're pretty much all haves. And I get the part of, they want freedom. The conservatives want freedom. But hopefully it's not at the expense of taking freedom away from somebody else. Hopefully it's an across-the-board kind of thing, which we would hope would happen. Now, at this point in time in the American politics, we have a Republican president, we have a Republican Senate, we have a Republican House of Representatives. And I understand your point about the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. I understand the point about the First Amendment. But if we look at what's going on today with this ideology of freedom of speech is only if it's speech I agree with. And that has become, and that's both sides. That's both sides. Anybody can take a fact and can manipulate it to their own narrative. That's something that the political class is very, very good at. And, you mentioned, and I'm going to go back just a little bit, about the revolution, the American Revolution. And I always tell my students in my civics class, you got to remember, these weren't poor people. These were men of status, property, and power and money. And when they signed that Declaration of Independence, they understood that they were putting all that on the line. They were just basically putting a big target on their back. And, if we look at the original way the United States was set up, not everybody could vote. There were still have-nots in that group. If you didn't own property, or if you didn't have this or didn't have that. So we've evolved beyond that. But it seems that now that we're talking about some of the policies and some of the direction that we're looking at here, who can cancel who on a television, what you say, this, I think we're moving. Are we regressing? Are we going backwards? And I understand what you're saying. The United States is a great country. There is absolutely no doubt about that. It is a great country. However, democracy is the weakest form of government. Plain and simple. Almost every political science will tell you that. It's the weakest form of government. And a representative democracy where you have how can I say, a professional political class made up of haves, all of them, both sides. And I don't even, Bernie Sanders. Scott's a huge fan of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is not a have-not. I mean, I'm sorry. He's just not a have-not. He's a have-too. And so has that blurred this idea you have about conservatives and liberals? They're basically the same thing anymore.
No. So the haves and the have-nots, of course, the have-nots are very few now in the United States. That's because of freedom was allowed them to evolve upwards, but they now no longer you can't call them a have-not, but you can call them that who advocates freedom, and so you can advocate them as a libertarian. You can advocate them as, you can say that they're a conservative. You can say that they're a Republican. You can say, as long as they advocate freedom for the individual, then you can see where their political and ideologies will lie. And as far as I can figure out, it's about 30% of people are just liberal, and 30% are just conservative Republicans, and in the middle is what everybody goes after for elections. And so the have-nots evolved into a party that advocates for freedom, and look, for example, I'll give you a great example. The South at one time were all Democrats. You had the guy who owned the plantation. You had all his slaves, proletariats, servants, and everybody worked for him. And everybody was of low knowledge. And the top guy were the Democratic South, the Southern Dems. And what happened was that revolution came along, called the Civil War, brought freedom to the have-nots, and what did they do with themselves? Over time, they became more and more educated, more and more possessing knowledge, and this brought them up out of poverty, and now companies have moved down the South because of the good working values of the South, and the higher education now going on in the South, and suddenly because of the South has more freedom, everybody rose up, and as people become free, more freedom and possess more knowledge, they want to participate in the exploitation of their freedom to do that which is good for themselves. And so the South now is Republican, it votes for freedom, and it votes for freedom because everybody has a better life now, and they want to enjoy the effectuation of their priorities, which is freedom.
Right. But I mean, I will say this: if you go back to the ideologies of pre-Civil War, during the Civil War, and for a period of time post-Civil War, yes, the South was Democrat. There was no doubt. The North was Republican. There was no doubt. But those ideologies have shifted over the last 150 years. As far as, now, if you were to take Lincoln and say that he was a Republican in today's political ideology, a whole bunch of Republicans are going to say, no, not at all, not even close. He would be probably more identified with the Democrats. But I guess, when we talk about the have and have-nots, and again, we could talk about it from the standpoint of economics, but I would rather talk about it from the standpoint of political power enough to be able to enact change, or to be able to have the political power to maybe keep your freedoms the way you want them, to do all that. So if you don't have the political power, forget the economics, forget the education, forget all that. If you don't have that political power, you are a have-not. And, unfortunately, that's the majority of the country. And you're right. If you look at the demographics of the political parties, I would argue that actually, when we're talking about Republicans, you're probably talking about 25%. When you're talking about Democrats, you're probably talking somewhere around 25, 30%. It is the independents, the down the middle. What I like to, I'm an independent, and I'm a down the middle moderate. Yes, I will lean a little bit as far as policy toward the conservative side, but socially, I'm definitely more liberal. And I think that is really what we're seeing today, is that there is that, I hate to say it, that third party that does not subscribe one way or the other. And I think they're having a hard time navigating the political climate of today. But they are still, if you look at the news, when they talk about approval ratings and this, that, and the other, what are they always focusing on now? Now they're focusing on independence, because they now are becoming the haves. They do have the power because they will go and vote. And I think that's a huge, again, evolution. And I think we've always evolved, and I think we'll continue to evolve. I truly do. What's going to be the outcome after these last, say, 10 years? It's going to be hard to tell, because we have gone through a huge seismic political divide. I mean, we always said here, back in the day, and we're all, the three of us are about the same age. Back in the day, Democrats and Republicans could always agree on the problem. They always disagreed on how to fix the problem, but at least they agreed that the problem existed. Today, we don't even have that anymore. They can't even agree that the problem exists. So, so how do you fix a problem if you can't even agree a problem exists? If you can't even come to that kind of agreement? So with the theories that you're putting out there, and yeah, it's based upon the historical building and the evolution of society and the evolution of how people come together as a political and as a social group. Do you think that's all going to kind of go away in the next 10, 15, 20 years? That it's just going to be something totally different because the definition of have and have not is going to totally change?
No, because the evolution of society is now predicated upon the accumulation of knowledge, and as knowledge accumulates, it brings more and more people into the idea that they would like to enjoy their freedoms. Now,
all right. So, do me a favor. Define to me their freedoms. What is that? I mean, that can mean an awful lot of things. What are you defining their freedoms as?
Freedom is the creation of a priority, which is a piece of knowledge.
Okay.
The effectuation of the priority, which is another piece of knowledge plus time, effort, information, knowledge, and material to effectuate in an opportunity in an atmosphere of risk. To effectuate, it's a sacrifice to create a reward, and so we create these sacrifices to get these rewards to bring goodness into our life, and the only way to do that is increase. 99% of the time, is to increase the amount of knowledge that we gain in our lives, and then we want to enjoy that reward that we seek from making our sacrifice. And so that operation is freedom, and as that proliferates through society, we have to go back and look at the base problem, whereby the American and French revolutions brought into into society that those who want control of society now have to convince you to vote for them, and so they are losing control because of this accumulation of knowledge, and the people recognizing that knowledge brings to them the ability to enjoy life more, and so they have so for those who want control, the Democrats, in order to combat that, they have to bring in more people who have less knowledge into society to vote for them, and that's what they've always done. They've always brought in people who had no knowledge to vote for them or to give them power, and so because the more, and then you have to convince you also. They'll throw in guilt in there to make you feel guilty that you have that you possess a lot of knowledge that produces goodness for your life. And so they'll do it by any means, by guilt or bringing other voters in, and so these are their problems, and the guilt comes from you left your brethren away and you now have riches. You need to either join us or because you're bad, and remember the third dictum that I was talking about, that the left will look at your guys and your hearts, and they will know that in your heart, having been a have-not, having been a lower class, your heart was bad, and we who enjoy freedom, we know that those who can work with us, somewhere in there there is goodness there, and we find that goodness and we want to work for it. And the same is in politics. Politics have the same problem. The Democrats will look at the Republicans and think that their ideas are no good, and the Republicans will look at the Democrats and think, well, yeah, their ideas are bad, but maybe there's some good about there that we can work with, and we can compromise, and we can go forward and make some laws and regulations and go forward. And that's why governments of the world throughout history have moved left. And then every once in a while, somebody comes in and drags it back, and either by revolution or a revolution of some sort, or through politics and through the authority of his political actions, he drags it back. And oh my gosh, you'd think that he was cutting people's heads off, like in the French Revolution. Well, and so so the politics now is more vehement than ever.
Yes. Yeah, there's no doubt. And, you make a very, you talk about knowledge. And, my issue with the concept of knowledge at this point in time is there is so much disinformation out there. And everybody seems to like to put it out there. And they speak to the audience, and they put the information out there to the audience that they're speaking to, because they know that'll motivate them. I agree with you in the sense that Democrats have always been very good at making you feel guilty for things. You should feel guilty for the stuff you have. But Republicans, I have to admit, all they ever tell you is who to be afraid of and why your problems in life are really somebody else's fault. So they both have a different way of approaching this. Once again, I come back to the idea that you could look at the House of Representatives and the Senate, the Supreme Court, and the president, all of them. Everybody in the cabinet. There are not any have-nots in that group, as far as economically is concerned. They're not have-nots socially. I mean, they've always been haves going along. They just basically are talking to two different audiences. And in many ways, the audiences are hearing pretty much an echo chamber. They're getting their confirmation bias because this is what they're programmed to listen to. This is where they believe they sit in society. And I think that's one of the things that, I have an issue with, is the idea that knowledge is freedom, but it is, but only if it's correct knowledge, only if it's true knowledge, only if it's factual. And again, as I tell so many of my students, I can sit here right now and say in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That is a historical fact that is not changed. But if you ask 10 historians why did he sail, you're going to get 10 different answers. You're going to get, because they're all going to interpret it from their own perspective.
Chris, can we go back to? We need to take a step back here for a second, because I've been quiet on this call mostly because I'm not sure I've had enough coffee to participate. But now I'm beginning to think there's not enough coffee in the world to have me participate. So I'm going to have to go back, and you're going to have to redefine haves and have-nots for me, because if this is about money or wealth, that's one thing, but is there some other definition of haves and have-nots that I'm not getting because I'm using it in the sense of simple wealth and power, or is there something else going on?
Yeah, so the haves and the have-nots, that dichotomy has evolved into those who want to control and political party, and the political party those who want to preserve freedom. And so it's no longer just who has money and power and not money, because now money and power are more fluid, and those have-nots, because of the American and French revolutions, most of them have now jumped out and joined the bourgeoisie class, and now have money. But so now it's really into the arena of ideas, and that they fight each other, but all the fights are oriented toward those who want to control and those who want freedom, and that clash is what produces the fights, the political fights that you see every day in the newspapers and on TV and in media.
So when you say control, you mean like, so the need to regulate, for example, has become identified with the Democratic Party, who stands for regulations and prohibiting the utter total freedom. Sort of, we're now kind of talking about it like the classical liberalism or neoliberalism in the economic sense of it, where so GE sits on the Hudson River. GE dumps all their garbage into the Hudson River. It flows downstream towards me in New York City, but they feel that they have that power, they have that ability to do it because really nobody can stop them. And then some reformer comes along, regulates them, says you have to stop doing that. They move out of New York altogether and come here to Connecticut, and where they can have more freedom, I guess, to do whatever it is that they want. And that's the kind of control that I think you're talking about, where the government is imposing regulations on people to keep them more or less not hurting other people. I mean, the regulations basically help three constituencies: the environment, which can't speak for itself, workers, and consumers.
Yes, and so, yep, and so not all regulations are bad, and not all, but regulations in general are have to be considered, and we overdid it for a while, and then some Republicans came in and kind of dragged it back, and so. And as I might have mentioned, that's why the left and the right, they look at each other slightly different. Now, a Republican would look at that regulation and go, yeah, that's an idea that's good, and we do need it to be able to run, and society needs laws and regulations and to be able to have its rules by which to proceed. But there's a limit, and we always have to have a battle between how far we should go on construction of constraint and control of the individuals. And that's why the 10 Amendments are so great because there is a limit, and so that limit is imposed how far a politician may go in constructing constraints against all those who participate in society. So,
Okay.
so some regulations are good.
Yeah. So I want to, and now I want to address the concept of knowledge, which I think is really where you and I part ways on this, because I don't think there's a drive for knowledge at the moment. Certainly not on one of the political parties, which seems to be leaning back more on things like the Bible and religion as the prescriptive method, rather than like scientific, what we would call scientific knowledge, which is questioning and testing and coming to conclusions that are them subject to more testing and more questioning. The other day, Republican, I forget where she was from, Florida probably, got up and said that we don't have to pay the TSA or something along those lines because it's not in the Bible, and there's no biblical basis for it to have the TSA. And yeah, I guess she's right. But if we're only going to look at the Bible as the root of all our, like, what we consider good, bad, useful, not useful, etc., then we're taking a huge step backwards, I think, as somebody who doesn't read the Bible all that much, but has a general idea from college courses and things like that of what it all says. There's a lot that people sort of make up. And my last, thing here, Mark mentioned it before, people who vote against their own best interests because of some kind of cultural issue or what they're being told is important. And here I'll go to this idea. It comes back to my head now during this current crisis with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, of our oil, our energy independence, the Keystone Pipeline debate for, I don't know, what, 10 years, 20, 15 years now, which states that we need this pipeline in order to have our oil be consumed by us here in the United States. Well, there's so many flaws to that argument. It's almost a ridiculous thing to bring up, because number one, Canada is a whole nother country. That's where the oil comes from. Number two, it's not going to the United States, it's going to China. China was the company that paid for the Canada company to make that pipeline in the first place. Second, we don't have any oil. We've never nationalized our oil companies or oil here in the United States as other countries have done. So we don't get anything. In fact, oil companies still get tax subsidies rather than paying taxes. So we are paying for oil companies, private companies, to make great amounts of wealth. And the ignorance of this country towards arguments like that just seems to me that, nobody's really doing a whole lot of thinking about this stuff when they go out there and say, we drill, baby, drill, or something like that, and that there's going to be a benefit to the people.
Yeah, so there is that's right. Knowledge has to be debated in society, and information has to be debated so that one can proceed in understanding how one should live. And that's okay. The nature
Chris,
of life.
And Chris, that brings up my last point, I think, which is this. The biggest difference right now, in my mind, between Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, is that if there are people suffering, Democrats and liberals want to do something about that. And even if it means that some people are going to cheat and some people are going to steal the money, they still uphold the general principle of we need to help these people. Whereas conservatives and Republicans, if there's one person cheating, they'll allow 1,000 people to die because of it, because they don't want that one person cheating. And that's the difference in orientation between these two groups.
I disagree with that. I don't think you can say that about Both sides, because um, certainly the conservative would want to help other people, and they do. They give more to charity than the Democrats, and the conservatives would want to just create a program that would reduce, restrict cheating, but they wouldn't want to kill it. I mean, after all, the Republicans have voted for Social Security. Without their vote, the Social Security would never have made it. But they voted for it, and so they're advocates of the welfare of all those who don't have so much. And the Democrats, I just don't think you can take the individual and uh, everybody wants to do well for everybody else. I don't think we can generalize to that extent about the nature of the Republicans and Democrats.
Well, if that was true, then the Republicans would support raising the cap on Social Security and making it more solvent than it is. And the only reason that Republicans and conservatives tend to give more in charity is because they tend to go to church more often, and when they're in church, they're asked to give more money, for charity, which sometimes goes not to charity but to the head of the church or the pastor or whoever who God told needs a new airplane. So I'm not really whereas
nobody's perfect.
Yeah, well, whereas Republicans may end up giving more money to charity, they are, in my opinion anyway, much less charitable when it comes to giving. And I think a lot of this, frankly, is based on race and this ongoing collision between what's right and race that it has existed in this country. You mentioned the flipping of the parties, right? It took 100 years for the Republicans to gain the South, and it was largely due to the fact that LBJ gave civil rights as a Democrat to black people in this country, and the other side changed. It was also due to Richard Nixon, who followed LBJ, being really clever about using abortion as a political issue and a wedge between Northern Catholics and Southern Baptists, who he wanted to convert to the Republican Party so he could defeat Kennedy, who was the one he thought he was going to be running up against until he was assassinated. So you mentioned the Democratic Party down south. There were Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats who didn't see things eye to eye at all in the antebellum South, but had an uneasy arrangement between them that they would just push the issue aside. In what became the Republican Party, the Whig Party split between what we would now call Republicans, the party of Lincoln, and the Know Nothing Party, which was not invested at all in fighting against slavery, but was more an anti-immigrant party because they were seeing so many mainly Irish immigrants coming into this country and were against them. So the parties they don't line up in any way, shape, or form with what's going on today from the antebellum South or antebellum America. The priorities are all very different. Republicans tend to be anti-immigrant. Republicans tend to be anti-civil rights. You can see it all the time. Fighting against civil rights and the constrictions that the Supreme Court put on them in the Voting Rights Act in 1965 or 64, whichever one of those two it was. And so, yeah, I would say that, I mean, and maybe this is because I'm kind of a believer in moral foundations theory, right? Which is how different people make different moral judgments, and that liberals care mostly about harm and fairness, while conservatives value authority, purity, loyalty, and aren't as invested in the idea of fairness to other people. Again, we come back to this idea that I come back to this idea that if there's one person cheating, they would do away with an entire program that really helps people a great deal. And yes, I guess they supported Social Security during the Depression. They've been fighting against it ever since, and they don't believe that healthcare is a universal right. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that is an ongoing debate in this country that really comes down to the divide between acting to reduce harm to people or being free to exploit people if you can, or the environment or anything else in an effort to make more money and go from being a have-not to a have. And the lie that they're being sold, the have-nots of the Republican Party anyway, is that someday they will be the haves, and that they better protect those rights because someday those rights are going to play a big part in their lives as well. And they seem to be deluded into thinking that. I mean, I think the number was something like 23% of people believe that they're in the 1%. I mean, that is an insane amount of cluelessness on the part of this country. And I'll bet if you looked into it, that you would see that Republicans and conservatives believe that more than Democrats and liberals.
Well, the one thing I'm going to say is, and the thing that scares me is 2% of the population still believe that the Earth is flat. So you really can't take too much into sometimes our educational value here. I think we also have to remember that, and when we talk about these kind of topics about the differences between conservatives and Democrats, we cannot paint with a broad brush, because now there's a third element in there, and the third element is MAGA. That is a totally third element to this equation. I truly do not believe that every single Republican believes half of what they might say. Same thing with Democrats. They probably don't believe half of it, but they do parrot it back because they believe it's politically expedient for them. And as we've said here so many times, one of the first ways to correct that issue is term limits. Let us no longer have those career politicians. And when we look at the South, I think we have to be very careful when we talk about the South and we talk about the North, whether they're Republican or whether they're blue or red, however they came up with that idea. When we talk about, say, New York, which is where I'm from originally. The only reason that it's a Democrat state is because of the city. You go upstate New York, that's red right there. They are redder than red. But you come down here to South Carolina, where I am now. Yes, Lindsey Graham, however he did it, I don't know, won again his election, but he's up for election this time. But 46% of the population voted against him. So it's not like when you say, well, South Carolina's a red state. Not all of it. 46% of it is not red. So, I mean, I think we have this tendency, and when we listen to media and social media and, the pundits and the talking heads, you have to remember they're painting with a very wide brush that does not exist, because there's a great amount of diversity. And I've been asked so many times, how long do I think it'll be before politics will return to normal? And I've said numerous times, I started out with saying 2036. Now I'm thinking maybe 2040, because the fact is that there's that third element that exists there, and it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. And as I tell my students, when we talk about, political change in the world, across the world, we defeated Germany in World War II. We did not defeat Nazism. Nazism is an ideal. You can't beat an idea with an army. You only can beat an idea through attrition. the people with the idea actually dying out. But there's always going to be an element of it there. And I think that's something that, when we're talking about it, and it's a good conversation when we have people really on two different sides that look at this quite differently. Chris, you look at it from a philosophical standpoint. Myself and Scott probably look at it more from a sociology, political science standpoint, because we understand, what we see today. But you know what? It's a great conversation to have. I will say this. I've been looking behind you there, Chris. You have a beer tap.
I do.
Well, you must be a have-not, because I also have one out in mine, and it's a double. Or is that a double you got? You must be the have-not. You're the have-not. I'm the have. And you know what? Yeah. That's a good have to be. The guy with two beer taps.
Chris, what's coming out of there right now? What do you got? What are you, an IPA guy?
Nevada.
Sierra Nevada. Oh. Nice. All right.
See, I brew my own. And I am a German wheat beer, Hefeweizens. Yes. Yes. Can't wait for summer. Out by the pool.
Scotch and gin for me, please.
Scotch and gin. Yeah, Scotch and gin for Scott. But yeah. Chris, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.
And that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We want to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing team, Apple Podcasts, the largest source of podcast and music online, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your destination for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. And most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society could not be possible. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing on the platform of your choice. It's easy, it's free, and helps our channel grow. For questions or comments, you can reach us at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So on behalf of Dr. Scott Gershwer and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power of society is knowledge. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next time.